Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, October 13th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Purdue game is tomorrow, the game against Michigan in 43 days. We're joined once again today by our buddy Ross Fulton, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And once again, we're going to be doing things the way we did them yesterday, but we're going to tweak it a little bit. We're going to change it up. We saw your feedback. We want to try and address those questions and concerns as much as we can. So here's the deal. Once again, all the stuff with the video, you're going to have to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com to address. However, we're going to try and make this a little bit more of a broad-based conversation so that then you still get a lot of the same stuff with on the public YouTube feed at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. And if you want to drill down to the real nitty-gritty of specific plays with the video, you can do that on our Huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. I will hopefully provide a QR code for you to scan on the screen right now if you are so interested in joining the site. We would appreciate it if you did. There's a lot of great stuff there, including Ross's stuff and conversations with Ross and other X's and O's guys. So there you go. Sales pitch over, but we'd love to see you there at BuckeyeHuddle.com. All right, on to the show and on to Ross Fulton. Ross, I know that there has been a lot of conversation this week about the linebacker play during the Maryland game, and that was certainly something that jumped out to me as well as I went back and rewatched it earlier in the week. How big of a concern is that right now, and what are the issues we're really dealing with here?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty minimal concern on the list of issues Ohio State has to deal with. The defense is playing very well. A lot of what people are complaining about with the linebackers is not their fault. Instead, it's scheme choices. So, Jim Knowles, and this gets to a bigger picture. Like, this is a very different defense than what we saw last year. They were still overwhelmingly a single high defense. The fancy coaching speak term is when you're single high, that means you're 8 wide against the run. So there's 8 gaps. You have a defender for each gap. This year, we're seeing a lot of mixing and matching coverage. So still playing, cover 1 rat, still playing cover 3, but a lot of split safety coverage is mixed in there. And so we can talk about those, but quarter, half, which is cover 4 to the field, cover 2 to the boundary. They ran that half a dozen times against Maryland. You saw some cover 4. You saw some bracketing on the inside. That Maryland's first touchdown actually was against bracket coverage. And so that's called, when you're playing split safeties, you got 7 wide. So you have 7 defenders. The problem is when you do that, and that's why teams like to use single high. It's been a constant throughout for a large chunk of football history, is because you can easily be down a man in the box. Particularly, if you're going to run, if you have 5 offensive linemen, a tight end, and you're bringing the quarterback run game into it, you've got 7 gaps to cover, or 8 gaps to cover, I should say. And so, a lot of what's happening is a linebacker is taking on, particularly like on an insert play or a gap run, taking on the block in the hole, and there's no one there to make the play because the extra gap's not accounted for until a safety comes down. And so, like, this first clip is a good example of that. So this was a split zone. The linebackers, the term is they need to, when you have split zone, you need to fall back, is the fancy term, because you've now created a new gap. So everyone has to move back 1. So you have the nose guard on this play. He has the A gap. Steel Chambers has the B gap. Defensive end has the C gap. And so Steel Chambers takes on the block in the B gap. Now, I think there is some valid criticism of Chambers in particular. He's not the strongest at the point of attack. I guess you probably wouldn't assume he would be. I mean, he's a sort of a smaller in space will linebacker, and he can tend to catch blocks downfield. So like that's a valid critique. But he's taking on the block here, which he's supposed to do, and with his outside shoulder, it's the proper technique in terms of that. There's just no one available because they're in quarter, half on this play. There are techniques you can use to like sort of try to make back up that gap when you're too high. Like you can have a defensive lineman play like a gap and a half or use heavy techniques. They haven't really shown a lot of that. And so they're basically making the trade-off of like, we're going to be sound against the pass, and we're going to confuse opposing quarterbacks by changing up coverages. And like will occasionally be okay giving up a 4 or 5 yard run play. That's not happening every time, but so obviously the Chambers, they're bringing in Cody Simon, a series or two. He's a little bit bigger guy, maybe a little bit more stout against the run. I thought Tommy Eichenberg played very well. You can't complain about a linebacker not making a tackle when he's like responsible for the backside A gap. And that's what he defends first. And then he has to account. Like, that's where you get on trouble. That's where you get in trouble on defense, is if everyone wants to play hero ball and I'm going to go make this tackle and suddenly the running back cuts back into your hole and there's no one there. And because the defense isn't designed for that. But so, this is the best Ohio State's played defense since 2019. I mean, you see the calls. It's like the as old as time, the call for oh, you should play CJ Hicks because he's a 5-star. But CJ Hicks' problem, you can go back and watch the film. He's played in some games this year. Is he does not fill his gap properly often, and he isn't executing his assignment. So they are succeeding on defense. They're not giving up explosive plays because people are executing what they're supposed to do. And so there's certainly no reason to mess with that. And and this next example is also linebackers in modern football have lots of responsibilities. It isn't just take on the ISO block and plug the run. It's also you got to defend RPOs. You got to play in space. And so there's a lot of things going on in any one play. You can't just say linebacker, see ball, get ball.
All right, so let's move on then to those RPOs. And that was something that going into the game, Ohio State players talked about how Maryland probably runs more RPO than anyone else they've seen, at least this year. And, that was something that it felt like they did a reasonably good job defending during the course of the game. So what was the key there? And, why did that work when, stuff has not necessarily always worked for Ohio State's defense over the last couple of years with, especially in this area?
Yeah, I mean, they really struggled against Maryland's RPOs and screen games last year, and they were really solid against it on last Saturday. And they clearly had a plan for it. And this also helped them play the gap run schemes increasingly well in the second half. And so, what they would do is the backside defensive end, which, if it was JT Tumaloa, they really executed this well because he's so good against the run. But if he saw a guy, the offensive tackle pulling or down blocking, he would make a beeline for the running back. He was canceling a gap in the backfield. So you're basically counting on the backside defensive end to take away front side run gap. And so then that would force Talia Tagovailoa to keep. But they had that accounted for. So they did essentially a script exchange on the backside. Here it's Sonny Styles on the play we're going to show. A lot of times it was Tommy Eichenberg, because he's the Mike to the field. And so he would account for the quarterback. And then a safety would account for Maryland kept running what's called an RPO slide. And so they would show split block and then that tight end or receiver released to the flat. And then, whether it be Josh Proctor or Latham Ransom, they would account for that. And so it just covered. So there were several times where Talia just basically had to spike the ball because there was just nothing accounted for. But as I said, they, as on this play, they consistently, increasingly succeed against gap runs by having JT attack from the backside and basically blow up the gap play in the backfield.
And there's a lot that's different with this year's defense. I think you can start with, hey, seems like it's pretty good, which is a change. But, we also talked beforehand about the fact that they're doing more stuff. It is a more diverse defense and they're a little bit less predictable. So the last two plays we're going to be talking about are going to kind of cover some of the ways in which that's true.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't know and you just watched the film of last year's defense versus this year's, you could easily think that Ohio State has a different defensive coordinator. It's so different. And so that both comes in the amount of coverages they're running. So we talked about that earlier, with this particularly the increasing reliance on split safety coverages. You probably don't see any coverage more than a third of the time in a game. But it also becomes in how they're changing up within the different zones, who's responsible for different parts of it. And so that, a perfect example of that is Josh Proctor's pick six. So on the play, they run Tampa 2, which they do run fairly frequently, so you get the two deep safeties and you have what's called a pull runner down the deep middle. But what they do here that I think fools Talia is pre-snap, they look like they're going to be in cover one. And the reason they do is because you have Proctor over the number 2 receiver, or the second receiver to the field, and then Jordan Hancock, the nickel, over the 3, which, again, if you're thinking cover 2, you're usually going to have, right, your 2 deep safeties are Josh Proctor and Latham Ransom. You'd expect them to be more ready to drop back, right, to the deep halves. But here, they run it such that Jordan Hancock is the deep half defender, and Proctor can basically sit there and rob that hook curl zone. And so they, again, by changing responsibilities, you'll see it. That's, one of the benefits of the 3 safety scheme. Obviously, they're using a corner a lot as their nickel, but, the same principles apply, that you can trade responsibilities. So, you can run cover 3 with different guys in the different zones, cover 2, etc. And so I think that paid off for them on that interception.
The last one, this is one of these things where, what do you want to do? You want to eliminate the number of the number of options the opposing team has. Well, what if they have no options? That seems like a pretty good result. So let's run through how Ohio State did that.
Yeah, I mean, so again, sort of doubling down, right? So the way that you keep opposing quarterbacks off balance is you make the picture cloudy for them. And so again, Maryland early in the game ran like a super mesh concept on third down when Ohio State wasn't cover 1, and picked off the backside corner and got an easy first down. And so they went back to that play a couple of times with mesh, which is a route you use against man coverage because you're getting the rub with the 2 inside receivers. But here, Ohio State's in their 3 high Tampa. So 3 high just means they got 3 safeties. They usually put Sonny Styles as sort of that middle defender in the 3 high. And they run a Tampa 2. And so, again, Maryland runs mesh, but those routes don't work as well against zone because you're just sitting there. And so Talia and Maryland have nowhere to go with the football. So, again, just another example of how Ohio State and Jim Knowles are changing up the looks a lot. You're getting a little bit more like some sim pressures, like you saw that with Styles on the blitz on that 1 third down. But a lot of it's just like coverage change-ups. And, again, I guess my big picture takeaway message would be like they are willing to trade up, giving up a little bit on the ground by being down a man. Like that happened against Notre Dame too. We talked about it, like especially when Notre Dame was in 21 personnel and had a lead blocker. Like, a linebacker, like a linebacker can take on a block in the hole, shed him, and make the tackle. But like you can't count on that consistently. Usually the concept is like the linebacker takes on the block and then you have a free hitter there. But they're willing to trade being down a man for this kind of coverage mix-up to keep opposing quarterbacks off balance. And clearly, it's working for them. Like, yes, they've given up some third downs and let teams stay ahead of schedule at times, but they're holding teams, they're limiting points scored, they're limiting explosive plays. And so that's a trade-off that seems to be working. And as you saw in the second half, they became a little bit even better at getting off the field once Ohio State was able to establish a lead. So I do think the more that the offense is able to help get started and get ahead, I think the defense will be in an even better spot to get off the field on third down.
Boy, we have been doing these shows for a few years, and it feels very odd to have the defensive half of these shows be much more optimistic and positive than the offensive half of these shows. That is a big change from the last couple of years, but probably broadly speaking, a good one for Ohio State. You have all been rubbing your magic lamps over the last few years and wishing for a better defense, and well, it appears that there is one here. So we'll see if that continues. But boy, what a time to be alive! Ohio State football, led by its defense, and what a time to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We have lots of coverage there of this year's team, lots of coverage of recruiting, lots of recruiting news blowing up this week as the Buckeyes are bringing in some additional recruits for the future, and potentially another one coming up a little later on in the week. We'll keep an eye on that one for you. And then also X's and O's coverage, team coverage. Coverage will be in Purdue, in Indiana, coming up on tomorrow's show. Have a morning show for you coming up out of Indiana, and then we'll be at Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette for the game at noon on Saturday. So make sure you check us out there at BuckeyeHuddle.com for lots of coverage of the team, lots of really active and fun community talking about the team, and a bunch of great stuff, all from our whole team of insiders covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, covering the team, all that good stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.